you go. So this is one of the unique things about the Moogerfooger phaser, is that you can set the rate to 0 and then manually sweep the phaser. And why is this so interesting is that it actually also translates to the CV inputs. And I could have like, so now I can have a foot pedal and do the phasing myself, if you imagine that that knob would be MIDI controlled. Right? But you can obviously also use it as a phaser where it sweeps itself. So 6-stage, 12-stage. The phaser in the 12-stage, and if you crank up the resonance, we don't have a lot of volume coming in here, but be careful because it can really like let loose. So that's one way of using it. Now, one of my favorite things is, let's see if I find a preset. I might not find it right away. Let me just dial it in. This is without. Actually, let me. The level is a little bit low. Without. It's just like a hi-hat, perfectly centered. But now, you don't have a real obvious phasing effect going on, but there is one. You have the LFO in the advanced settings. It's also not possible on the original ones. You can have the LFO being stereo. And now the phasing is happening in the stereo field and not right in front. So you still have that hi-hat in the middle, but you have this weird thing like in the stereo field, like it's moving. Listen to it.
Yeah.
It's very slowly moving. And even if you put it to almost nothing, you're like, why is this stereo? Like almost barely can hear it. So I love this because it's like a very subtle way of opening things up without like putting it right in front of you that something is moving left and right in the stereo field. Right? This is without the phaser. This is with it. And then you can like doing obvious phasing effects. Oh, this might be a good one for people. Like, why is there no mix knob on the phaser? Because if you don't phase, you don't need a mix knob. So basically the amount of the LFO here is sort of like the mix knob. So you can use it just without the LFO as a sound sculpting tool. And that's that. That's the phaser.
I think you touched on a really key point, you know, when you brought the, well, it'd be the amount in this case way down, where it was just adding that very subtle bit to the left and the right field. It's those little bits of ear candy that really help separate kind of generic music, I think, from the more impassioned sort of like full-on tracks. In my opinion, it's the little bits. That's what when I listen to it, it's almost like, even in techno, it's always the one synth hit that happens every once in a while that I'm just like, that's it. And it's just, if you add that sort of thing, obviously don't overdo it, but just adding that subtle bit of variation and variety, and I would say character to your tracks using something like the Moogerfooger phaser is just it just brings it to that next level.
I totally agree. I get lost in those tiny little details, both on the production and on the development side. It's like we found this dither algorithm. I don't know if you guys know this. This is a guy called Air Windows. He makes open source plugins without a UI. He didn't used to be open source, but he open sourced them a few years ago, and he has this Patreon channel like do check it out, Air Windows. He has these very opinionated, specific plugins that do very interesting sonic things. And he discovered a way of doing dithering in the floating point realm. This is getting geeky, but like dithering is a way to add noise to a digital sound signal so that you don't have the steppy, like weird digital artifacts, but noise that takes over, and it sounds more pleasing to the human ear. And he figured out a way of doing dithering in the floating point domain, where people usually think that you don't need dithering, but then he proved why you do. And when we evaluated his algorithm and put that into the plugins, I was like, wow, it adds just that tiny amount of detail that does open it up once you start stacking them. It like gives that little amount of space that they need. Yeah, like I'm all about it. I'm all about those tiny details. The main output is a traditional phaser, right? Where you have the dips of the all pass filters sort of cascading on top of each other and creating those notches going downwards that create the typical phaser sound as they moved around. The aux output, which the original also had, does the opposite, where it basically uses that signal and it substitutes it from the original, and now you get peaks instead of dips. So it's a different way of doing a stereo field with a phaser, but it does make like interesting motion happening, where the left and the right side are related, but they're not the same signal. And then you can switch it around to the opposite side. And if you want, you can put the LFO in stereo, and it's like another stereo motion that you can add there.